I'm Jen West, professional rebel of delight.
And I'm Dave Wiesdock, sage of creative scaffolding.
And this is Shadow Casting. Hey, Dave, happy Leap Day. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
That's awesome. Today is our very first podcast episode, and I thought the people might want to know, what the heck does shadow casting mean? What are we talking about? What are we going to bring to the table? And so I thought I'd start today off with kind of a rundown of what we mean by shadow and casting. Obviously, casting, it's a play on words for podcasting, but we go a little deeper than that too. So let's start with shadows. And when you think about shadows, first, let's just look at a real shadow. What is it? I was thinking about shadows in the way of when we look at shadows, or when I think about shadows, I think of two different energies. I either think of sitting in the sunshine and relaxing and it being a hot day and finding a shady space. And the shadow is just refreshing and cool and just relaxing. But then there's that other shadow, that ominous shadow that you catch out of the corner of your eye when you're home alone or you're out in nature and there's just dark, shadowy energy. What we're going to do is we're just going to play with both of those energies. And when I first thought of shadow casting, I thought of the long shadow that people leave, and it kind of had a negative connotation. But then I was listening to Adam Grant's new book on Audibles called Hidden Potential. And he's talking about how kindergarten teachers have this long shadow that they cast on their students. And it really reflects on how well they're going to do in school in the long run. It all starts with this kindergarten teacher, and whether they feel empowered to make mistakes or whether they feel like they have to get it right. And those students who feel like they can make mistakes and try again and do stuff that's difficult, they do better in school and get better grades and are happier with the schooling. And so that long shadow that the kindergarten teachers cast is a really good thing. And it just inspired me for the shadow casting, because thinking about that long shadow and how do we create our own shadow and how are we affecting people out into the future?
Yeah, I really like the idea of Adam Grant's, I think it was a study, right? Where they kind of looked longitudinally and like across a long period of time, these students that received this kind of guidance from kindergarten teachers and how that impacted them, not only through school, but later in life. And it's funny because one of my earliest memories is actually in kindergarten. And I play this in my head a lot. When we graduated kindergarten, our diploma said not necessarily, well, we got the diploma that said we graduated, but they gave us another piece of paper. And on it, it said what our kindergarten teacher thought we would be career-wise when we became adults. And it was a very positive experience for me because she chose that I would be a senator. And obviously,
Wow.
right? And obviously, I never thought that I'd be a senator. But to me, and having kind of that perspective as an adult now, I realized that it wasn't about the position that she gave me. It wasn't about the career she chose. It was about what it meant to me, right? And I think that's an important part of shadow casting. Intention from someone else, intention from ourselves is important. And how we internalize and use that intention within our own lives and cast our own shadows also plays into that. And so my teacher chose that I would be a senator. What that did for me is that made me realize I can be a leader in my life. I have this ability, this charisma, this energy that people gravitate towards, like a politician. And I can use that in a different way than where she had assigned it as a politician. I use it in work. I use it as the sage of creative scaffolding. Something that happened when I was like 5 still affects me now as an adult. And that is a very long shadow. So I love this idea and concept.
Yeah, it's just a huge shadow. And then everything we do is going to be based on shadows because, yeah, it's just something that you and I have put in our heads. It's become shadow this, shadow that. And there's so many different dynamics to a shadow. And the person who really turned us on to this idea of using a physical shadow is an anthropologist, neo-forager friend of ours named Ariel Appel. And he really took shadow to the next level. He took the idea of a shadow and looking at it in nature and realized that for him, shadow was reality. If you wanted to understand reality, you had to look at the shadows of things. What he was looking at was you have this light source like the sunshine, and then you have an object like a tree, and that creates the shadow on the surface of something. But if any one of those pieces are missing, the shadow's gone. You just can't have one. So it's the interaction of all of these pieces that create the shadow. And we just dove into this idea once he created it. He also took it to the next level, which was physical shadows are representation of reality. What about our own shadows? So the illumination for us as people would be, we would be the object, and then our environment and circumstances would be the illumination hitting us. And then our reaction and how we play into those circumstances would be the shadow that we cast out, and the surface would be all the people around us that we hit. So it just keeps going outward, and it's a really fun way to use personal growth not only to change ourselves but to give us a reason to change, because we want to choose the shadow we cast. Maybe sometimes we do want to be a little ominous, but I have a feeling that most of us want to be like your kindergarten teacher, Dave. We want to cast that shadow that's inspiring and gives us energy. And how do we do that? And that's the game we're really playing here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the beautiful thing about Ariel's analogy of the shadow with the illumination, the object, our shadow casting coming in out from ourselves, that energy, I think that even plays with kind of the example that I was using earlier. So in that case, the illumination, the environment would be that teacher saying, hey, you're going to be that senator. The object would be me, right? That she's casting the light onto me. And then I took that, my individual self took that, and the shadow that I project from that is to lean into that energy of the charisma, the leadership, the ability to organize, interact with people, that extrovertedness that I love to lean into when I'm talking. I get very animated when I'm talking. I use my hands. And so that's how I impact others, taking that to that next level. The shadow, if it's an illumination on a tree, for example, the shadow is on the grass, right? We don't see it on the tree itself. The shadow of the tree is on the grass. It affects how we look at that ground. And so I think when we start to really look at a shadow from a physical context and apply it to an internal sense or to ourselves, our energy, you really can see that the overlay just has no bounds. I mean, another example that comes to mind is a situation that happens. Let's say, there's that famous parable. It's the one about how there's a boy in a village and he breaks his arm, right? And everyone in the village, or I think it was his leg, right? And everyone in the village is like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that he broke his leg. He'll never be able to walk again. And his dad, who's a farmer, goes, could be good, could be bad, right? He's not judging the situation. He's in just the energy of what's happening there and then. And then 3 months later, their village is conscripted to go to war, and the boy can't go. And so he's able to stay behind and help take care of the farm and his parents because he had broken his leg. But even when the village recognizes that, they go, oh my gosh, so maybe this was a good situation. The farmer still holds to kind of that neutrality, that energy of, well, it could be good, could be bad, right? And so I think that plays really well with this in that sense of there are many situations in our life and environments that we can be put into. And really the way that it impacts us isn't the environment itself, right? It's not the illumination. It's not what's being put onto the tree. It's the object and how we choose to present ourselves into the world, onto that grass, onto that surface.
Yeah. When we're talking about that energy, when you talk about nature, you've just got the illumination in the tree and it just casts down. And then, of course, on the tree, the shadows on the tree are its texture. its character, who it is. And I think that's one of the pieces we're going to be playing with, because unlike the tree, we get to choose our texture. And maybe when we were kids, yeah, that kindergarten teacher had a lot of say in how well we were going to do in life and our mindsets, at least initially. But as adults, we now have the power to play with that. We can look at all of those shadows that were cast on us, good, bad, or indifferent, and then start to play with the texture of our own personality and clean it up. And that's where Myers-Briggs and Enneagram and all of these other tools we're going to play with as we go along are going to come into play, because we're just tweaking the texture of how that illumination hits us so that we can cast a purposeful shadow outward. And that's our whole goal, is that we are choosing the shadow that we will put out into the world.
I love that. That's so cool. Yes. And I was thinking too, there's so many different, when I say a tree, what comes to mind too, right? Is it a big tall redwood? Is it an oak? Is it an elm? Is it a maple tree? And one of the things you said really struck me there, which is that is the beauty of the tools, right? The things that we're going to play with, the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs, and it helps identify, like you said, the texture, right? These different trees present differently in the world, and as we use these tools to understand how we present in the world, then we create that purposeful shadow, like you said. And that's so cool.
Yeah, it's all about what do we actually control. And so we can't control what illumination is put on us, what shadow has been cast on us in the past. No control over that. We just have control of this moment and how we want to look at it now, change that and adapt that story to make it more empowering. And and then take it out into the future. Who do we want to be? What do we want to become? How are we going to take all those tools and mesh them up and really make it fun for us?
Yeah, it's kind of funny you brought up the into the future part, really tying this to the Adam Grant part of it, right? Our first inkling of kind of how we're going to project that shadow or purposefully into the world is from a kindergarten age, when we're just getting self-awareness and an understanding of who we are, let alone how we interact in the world. And so some of those first knobs, those first clues into who we are, probably are the longest lasting part of the shadow.
Right, exactly. From our parents, from our friends, what was allowed, what wasn't. And then, this takes us right into our next favorite shadow, which is Carl Jung's archetypal shadows, which he believed and came to the conclusion that there are parts of ourselves that society, or we believe that society or our parents or our friends told us we should not have if we want to live in that society. And so we reject those things and we say, we're not that. And we close the doors on that part of our personality, whether we were told we're not allowed to be angry or we're not allowed to speak up. We need to be quiet and kind. For girls, it's like, be seen, not heard. And guys are like, you got to be strong and don't cry, all of those stereotypes. And so we lock ourselves down and we try to conform, and they're all hidden in this part of our psyche called the shadow. And it's unconscious. We don't even know it anymore because we closed those doors so early. And not all of them are bad either. Maybe you love to play the guitar and your parents told you that wasn't a living. You need to pay attention to the things that are important. Or you liked art and it's a waste of time. And so you shut down these talents you had, and those go into your shadow. So whether it's perceived dark or light, empowering or disempowering, all of these shadows are mixed up inside of us. And the funny irony is the fact that if you accepted them and held them and allowed them to express themselves consciously, they're all useful tools. But when they're hidden in the shadow, they're kind of like mischievous toddlers and they cause problems in your life. Even the light ones, because you'll feel envy because somebody else is a great artist, but you'll feel small and so you won't try, or you'll avoid anger at all costs so you don't set any boundaries in your life. And so just all of these topics start to roll in, and Carl Jung, he's just so much fun.
I was thinking as you were saying that another cool expression of this too is I'm thinking of like a bonsai tree. I don't know why. Like that's kind of coming to mind of like as the tree grows, you make small, very incremental adjustments. Maybe you bind a branch, maybe you cut off a certain leaf, and it's very purposeful, very methodical, very mindful of your actions. I would love to believe as generations grow that purposefulness and that mindfulness is what is put into our own trees growing, our own individual cells. And that's not always the case. And so what happens is as those shadows manifest, we start to judge them, right? We get into judgment. I think where that kind of pivots is with the parents and the friends. It's learning to not judge that, right? Easier said than done. It's learning, as you said, to take the gifts that you were given, to take that bonsai tree, whatever it looks like, and lean into the beauty of it. Because no matter how the bonsai tree grows, no one ever looks at a bonsai tree and goes, you probably should have bound that branch. You probably should have clipped that leaf, right? The bonsai tree is beautiful because it was a creation and it was a masterful exploration of how that tree wanted to grow. It's the sculptor with the clay, with the marble. But here's the really, really cool thing. Humans and where I think Carl Jung was coming from is humans are a magical tree, the magical marble, the magical clay. We can adapt, right? We can lean into those things, but until we understand how our original shadow is made, how we are currently presenting ourselves into the world, like that's the first step. And so, learning to understand how we're presenting, how those societal expectations were shared with us, and what gifts can we get from that. That's really where finding the beauty of the bonsai tree, I think, comes in.
Yeah, that analogy is super fun because, in one sense, that tree has been taken off its course because whatever it was going to be was fuzzy and out of shape and stuff. And, if it was left in the ground, it would be this one kind of tree. But in another sense, it was formed and modified and given like this beauty. And in a way, you could look at the bonsai tree from the negative and the positive side of it. So you could be like, the shadow is being cast by the artist onto this tree. And that's not what it was meant to be. So that could be the parent saying that art isn't useful, or what are you ever going to use dance for? How are you going to pay the bills? Or, the fact that you talk so much and are so social, that's a bad thing. Or that you want to move all the time, that's unacceptable. You need to sit and be quiet. All of those things that are a natural thing are being paired. On the other hand, we could be the artist of our own bonsai tree. So we're fluffy and we're scruffy and we're not right and we're not even ourselves anymore. And we can start to reassemble ourselves and create ourselves in our own masterpiece and our own artwork and express ourselves, one from the personality that we are or we were born with, but to its most profound and awake state, I guess is the word I would use, the choice, because we've got like this inner programming that's gotten stuff paired on top of it, and we can get rid of all the stuff that's not as useful to us and move into the next thing. All right, so in the final consideration of the bonsai tree, it's really, how do we want to cultivate ourselves to grow? In what direction do we want to go? What character do we want? Who do we want to be? It almost goes into like the stoic idea of, you are the cultivator of your character. You have to pay attention.
I am realizing just how freaking deep this goes. I think the other beautiful thing about the bonsai tree is exactly what you were just saying there, that we can kind of control I don't like the word control. We can guide how that healing process happens, right? How the bonsai tree can be formed. And I just really like that analogy. We're going to lean more into that as we keep going because I feel like that's going to play well with as we keep talking about kind of the shadow and
Yeah.
the unconscious.
I like being the artist of my own inner bonsai tree. I like that a lot. Yeah, so that's kind of a highlight of the shadow side that we want to explore and why it's called shadow casting, because shadows really play a big role in all of our ideas and where we're coming from. But also, there's casting. And there are several ways that we use the word casting. Like I said, it's a play on words for podcasting, where shadow casting instead. But also, there's the deeper look at casting, like magic and spells, and you cast a spell, and the words we use, the thoughts we have are a spell. They create our character, and they also create that shadow that goes out from us. And we need to pay attention to the spells we're creating. What are we casting with our words as we speak, with our energy, with the emotion that we feel most often? I mean, we each have like this small little world of emotions that we like to feel, and there's one that we'll go to when we're stressed. For me personally, it's melancholy or self pity. If you know anything about Enneagram, I'm a type 4. So that envy piece and seeing what's missing is big for me. So I've got to pay really close attention and not just go into that, because that's not who I want to be. It's there. It's good to recognize sometimes there's a reason to be sad. But if it's just a habitual melancholy because today's stressful, well, do I have to? No. Do I have to put it out into the world? No.
And I would really love to add to this that part of the play with casting, it's a double sided coin, and you hit on it, and that's curiosity. It's the initial break from the default bonsai tree to the bonsai tree you want to build is being curious about the bonsai tree you're starting with.
Mm.
It's so you brought up how as in your Enneagram, your default is kind of that melancholy. Mine is anger. And I have learned over time that I express anger in many different ways, more than just an outward expression, right? It can be turned inwards. It can become depression, as they say. Depression is anger turned inwards, or it can be an outward expression. Knowing that that's my default, when it comes up, how can I get curious about it? Why am I angry? What's bringing up this anger? Is the anger trying to tell me something? And the words that I use as I lean into that are important as well. If I go, I always get angry, then I'm always going to get angry. And so I think part of casting, as you're talking about these words, is kind of bringing up that impeccability, learning to be true to your word, learning to even if the word choice isn't perfect, it's learning to own the words that you are using in a non-judgmental way. For example, and continuing with the past one, if I go, I'm always angry when ... then I will always be angry when that happens. However, if I go, why am I always angry when that happens? Well, then that opens up the energy, and you can kind of feel it as I even ask that. There's a release there. There's a openness. There's an ability for that anger to go somewhere else. And then when that happens, that's really, to me, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but to me, that's like the power of this entire podcast. It's learning to lean into your own power, right? It's learning to, as you are casting those shadows, as you're becoming impeccable with your word, as you're learning about your inner artist, as you build your own inner bonsai tree, it's realizing that you do have the power to affect that. And
I'm right there with you. It's that habit too. We did until I was studying the Enneagram, I didn't realize envy was a thing for me. Or, it was just like, or even melancholy. The funniest thing is one of my nicknames that my mom gave me was somber. And she never said it when I was sad, and it was just kind of this cool name. I didn't know what it meant, but something unconsciously in her saw that I kind of had this melancholy in me, even though I loved to play, I rode horses, I always felt like I was pretty jolly and happy, but there was something as I got older I started to notice that melancholy, and life gets harder and more stressful. I think mainly my mom kept it easy for me, so I was able to just be playful and light and really enjoy my life. And then stress came in, there's that melancholy, and I was like, oh my god, my nickname was Somber. How did that never. I was also Ida Mosquita, so I had lots of nicknames. I don't think I ever ate mosquitoes, so maybe a grasshopper when I was little.
That's so funny. Mine were Sunshine and Boo Boo.
Were you clumsy?
No, well, I was, but it was also like the play on Boo Boo from Yogi and Boo Boo, smarter than the average bear.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, my son, I call him a humbug. And that's like from the Grinch, or not the Grinch, the Christmas Carol. And humbug. But whenever he's happy, he hums. And one of his nicknames I used to call him when he was little was Bug. And so when he was happy, he was a humbug. And anyway, we're digressing.
No, this is actually beautiful. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because this ties right back to the beginning this is a great analogy of where I was trying to find. So humbug, right? That's the illumination. The
Mhm.
individual interprets that. Your son knows that you're calling him a humbug because he hums. Someone else that's really familiar with Carol, the Christmas Carol, might internalize that as their individual because it's the same illumination. But
Right.
they go, "Oh, I'm a humbug. I'm a miser. I'm a Scrooge. I don't like Christmas," right? And so that is a great example of where we're trying to, kind of isolate this out for everyone. The illumination is neutral. Where the judgment happens, where the correlation happens is in the individual, in the object.
Yeah. And I agree. And also I'm gonna push against it a little. It also depends on the way it comes across too. So if I'm like, you're such a humbug, then that has an energy of the negative one. But I'm like, oh, humbug. But if he started to watch the Christmas Carol and humbug was bad, maybe that would change over time too. Start to hear that voice differently. So that would be him creating it. And so that's where that would go. And the casting, you know, my casting, I want to make sure that mine's on the most positive end of that. And that's the only power I have is what I'm casting out.
You're right. You're right. The illumination can have an energy behind it. I do agree with that. And that makes it really interesting because now I'm sitting here wondering, okay, your mom called you somber growing up. Even when you were sharing it, you were smiling, there was a lighter energy behind it. It didn't get somber, so to speak, until you were talking about getting into adulthood and what that really word really meant. So it makes me wonder it almost just curiosity of like where was she with that? What
Yeah.
was the energy behind that? Maybe to her that word meant something else completely, you
Yeah,
know?
no, it was always light. It was always loving. Now even saying it, it feels weird to me, like it's the wrong word but it was always light. It was always sweet. And so, yeah, Somber was just a cool name. I don't even
Like
know
it.
where it came from. Yeah. So that's the power of the casting and the words we use. And I think as we go along, we're going to play with words in other ways. Cause one of my favorite things is to take a negative word and then use it as a yearly word to make something good out of it. So maybe we'll do something on that as well.
I really like how this just all keeps tying together. And to me that's always been the real draw to this concept of shadow casting. And we're talking about everything from kindergarten teachers giving us diplomas with what our career future might be to what nicknames we got from parents. And again, these analogies all play together, right? They're all interconnected. It all helps build that initial tree and it affects how we cast into the world. And you even hit on that next part, which is the longer shadow or the shadow squared, I guess, of your mom gave you nicknames and now you're giving your son nicknames. And it's kind of continuing that casting. And maybe your mom got nicknames from her mom, right? And so it kind of, even though the nicknames is a simple example, it's true for anything, whether we have an emotional experience or attachment to something, there's always something that was casted onto that. I think that plays well with how we want to look at our own shadow and take personal responsibility own how we're casting our shadow, because it can be something as simple as a nickname, or it can be something more profound. And yet there's still a shadow casted. There's still an effect that can linger generations. And it's owning that, I think, is
Oh yeah, and I've seen it before, like with other people I've talked with, where an aunt or something said just this one sentence and devastated the kid, and like that lives with them. That's their story, and it was nonchalant. They weren't even thinking about it. It was just a moment of, oh, you're such an annoying kid. One time, it doesn't matter how much love and affection was shown, that annoying kid stuck, and it changed their entire personality. And so us being as aware as possible of these kind of things, they're going to pop out, but noticing them and trying to mitigate those. There's one last aspect of casting that came to my mind as I was playing with the word, and that's the casting you do when you're fishing. And so you're going out and you're hooking something and reeling it back in. And if you're fishing, then it's often for nutrition. And I think that's a fun way to play with casting as well. You're just sending your awareness out either in front of you to how you're affecting your environment, or you're casting that rod inside yourself, and you're looking deeply within and just letting that awareness soak into you and seeing what is happening in your body when environmental things hit you. And you'll feel like triggers happen that are just habitual, that you've always gone into. And that's where the exploration gets really, well, I say fun. Most people, when they're triggered, they do not like that feeling at all. But I've gotten to the point when I feel a trigger, it's exciting. It's something to look at, it's something to explore inside myself. And that's where growth happens, because it hits you and then you have an opportunity. Until you see it, there's no opportunity. So that's the final throw of casting, is to either cast out and see how your energy affects the people you're with, or cast in and start exploring triggers and the like.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. I think I'm just gonna let it sit there. That's great.
If you've looked at our page, you'll see that we're shadow casting, but we have this tagline that says celebrating humanity. And how do you look at all these shadows and somehow celebrate humanity? And what Dave and I have noticed is that the more we do our own work and we start reflecting what we're working on, we start to give other people a break. And some of their reactions in the world and stuff make us smile instead of making us mad. We're like, oh, that's their natural shadow that they don't see. Or they're, oh, look at that beautiful casting that's going out to other people. And let me give an example of my mother. So she has an energy with the people around her that other people adore. My mother, they just think she's a saint. I mean, she's just bubbly and light and huggy, and everybody loves her. She doesn't understand why people give to her, nice to her, or just say sweet things. It's like, no, it's because you are a saint. Everybody loves you. They want to do nice things for you because you are just the kindest person ever. But she can't see what she's casting out. And of course, we always focus on the negative casts instead of all the beautiful positive casts.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking about as you were talking about that. Kind of like that idea of projection almost, where it's like you can unconsciously shadow cast onto someone your opinion of them or your thoughts of them. And so really shadow casting is about being in a space of awareness and looking at how how you cast into the world. And so it creates this space of empathy, and I really like the tagline because it's celebrating our humanity. It's not holding space for it, it's not honoring it, it's not even having awareness of it. It's celebrate. It's like this next level. It's like, hey, I see kind of how you present yourself in the world, and I'm going to help you honor that. I'm going to help you be joyful in that. And I think that creates just a space where we can lean into our humanity, and where there is a sense of understanding between two people. And that's going to not only create awareness and increase awareness within yourself, but it's going to create and open up awareness within that other person as well. And as that happens, tying this way back to the beginning of the podcast, that's how that long shadow gets cast. It's that ability to create awareness and honor the awareness within you, and to help other people honor the awareness within them. And maybe that's why the kindergarten teacher is such a powerful example, because it's one of those first moments, again, where we get to celebrate our humanity, where someone is helping us open up to how we interact in the world, and making, maybe not even making, but allowing that to be okay. And I think that that's really impactful.
Yeah, exactly. As I think about that kindergarten teacher, what do kindergarten teachers do for children when they're really good? They see all of the bright potential that's in that child, and helps them express it. Like they're happy for whatever unique quality they bring. And I think that's what shadow casting teaches us how to do again. It teaches us to not look for what's not working in our environment, or what's not working inside of us. It's just an awareness. And then how do we blossom? How do we grow? And how do we help other people? Because we often, if we're in a happy, joyful state, we see the best in the other people around us. Even if they're kind of in a funk, we're like, I see your potential. I see all of these cool character traits and flow states that you don't notice because it's just so natural for you. And I want to help express that.
Yeah.
So now we've talked about casting, we've talked about shadows, and Dave and I are super curious about what you, the audience, are hearing. What's catching your ear and making you curious about the world? Because we will be exploring a wide variety of ways to cast that real, and look inside at our own personalities and what makes us unique and what our flow state is, so we actually see it and we can embody it more. We're also going to look at temperament tools like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram and Gene Keys, and definitely archetypes, because we love archetypes.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, we love archetypes. We can't get enough. I mean, look at our names.
That's right.
And then, we also like to play with quotes. And our whole goal is to take all of these life abstracts and make them practical and useful. How do you actually apply them to cast a better shadow out and to live your best life with purpose and joy? Moving from that, let us know. Give us feedback. We want to hear what you want, what you like, what you don't like. We like feedback. We're here to grow.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to growing with you guys. And thank you so much for listening.
Until next time.